Hey everybody, Matt Truman, Brick City Town Hall. I'm one of the admins over here along with Brian. I'm glad you are a member of Brick City Town Hall. So tonight I wanted to make a video because I watched your last city council meeting and I think there's some information that you need to know.
Sid?
No objections, Mayor. Brian, at the last work session, we were talking about the water main study, water system study, and the recommendation was put $4 million in the budget for consecutive years. Your statements were to bring that back to council early next year, and I think several council members voiced their recommendation that be brought back sooner as opposed to later. With the budget coming up for vote next month, do you anticipate making a recommendation to increase that in the next work session?
I recall as part of that discussion, from my perspective, my recommendation to council was that you allow us time, you allow staff time to put together a more structured presentation on our recommendation on how such funds would be made available based on the information that we had and the limited amount of time that we had to respond to that information and its relation to the budget. That's what I recall my comments being as part of that.
Yes.
I don't recall there being a definitive direction from the majority of members of council to make any changes to the budget as we had proposed.
And that is also true, yes.
So that is why the budget, at least as it was presented tonight for the second reading and would be presented for the third reading, unless we're directed otherwise tonight, would include the original $1.3 million that we had budgeted for the water main replacement program, and any subsequent changes to that budget amount could be made by council following presentations later in the year based on the information we would bring forward.
That's just what I wanted to know.
Sure.
Sooner than later was the directive that was put out, but there were no dates and months or anything like that, and I understand what you said. I just wanted to clarify that.
Sure.
Thank you so much, Brian. Thank you,
Sure.
Mayor.
Our intent is one of the authors of the study will be here to present the findings of the study in greater detail than our initial summary, but in obviously a more concise manner than the report itself on February 23rd, I believe, is the work session that
And I seem to remember you mentioning something like that.
Correct.
I don't remember the exact date if you mentioned it the first time, but
Sure.
I do remember you saying that would be part of the presentation to be brought in. So, no, I was just looking at specifically if there was going to be a recommendation for the budget for that line item increase, and the answer is no for next month. And that's what I was looking for.
Correct.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mayor.
Sure.
Yes, Glenn?
If I can add to that, I'll just restate my comments from the work session that I would like to see a number much closer to that $4 million before I can support this. I think that it's very urgent and important for our city, and I believe we can find it if we put our nose to the grindstone. We find it for other things. I think we can find it for this being this important. So, thank you.
Yes, Anita?
I second what Glenn said. I will not be in support of it unless we get more into the water fund.
Anyone else?
Okay, you watched that piece of the video. Something I think is very important to point out. You may have heard the term TIF district, tax increment financing. TIF funds are meant for infrastructure. Has the city spent their TIF funds, the TIF districts that they went out and sought, have they utilized that money, that TIF money, for infrastructure? It would be a debate, I assume. They built a $20+ million music center with TIF funds. Was that infrastructure? While the pipes below you that are bringing you essential water are crumbling, was that a good move? I was talking about this way back in 2015. Anyway, next video.
Good evening, Council. Vince King, resident of Huber Heights. So today I'm here to talk about the organization chart that was presented last week during the work session. So I had an opportunity to listen to the comments that were made, and I wanted to provide some of my own. So pardon me, I have them written here. So first and foremost, I had some concerns. I saw that the parks manager position was being taken from the parks manager down to a parks technician. So I had some questions and some concerns as exactly what will that do for our community? What will that do for the city, for the parks, for all the programs that we are trying to do? What will that do for you? Since the establishment of that position in 2019, I think, and ever since we decided or we wanted, the citizens recommended that in the Parks Master Plan, that we wanted to have someone focused and dedicated on our parks. This to me seems like a complete 180. We're taking a position that is, no kidding, dedicated to focusing on our parks, making sure that we have the amenities that we need, that we have the repairs that need to happen, and we're doing a complete 180. So my question to you is, are you truly in support of this? And what will this do for our community? Will we have someone focused on that in the future? Additionally, I wanted to make sure that we as a community have a voice in that as well. We need to make sure that as a community that we're not moving backwards. This to me feels as if we're moving backwards. I want to make sure that we're moving forward, that we live up to our slogan, come grow with us, that we continue to move forward, and that, instead of, just having one person, why can't we have an entire department focused on parks and recreation? I know we're not as big as our neighboring cities, but I do believe we need more folks focused on parks and recreation within the city of Huber Heights. We have the YMCA at the Heights who's focused on it. We have a current parks manager who's focused on nearly everything that we want and is trying to make everything that we want happen, but one person can't make it happen on their own. So what do they rely on? They rely on the volunteers within the community. They rely on you. So I'll say me, I encourage you to really get an understanding of why do we need to make this change, and how will this not only affect our community, but that individual and their families as well. And that's all that I have. Thank you.
Thanks, Vince. Any questions? Glenn?
No questions. Vince, thank you so much for your comments. I, too, had similar thoughts and had to kind of relook over everything. But I agree. I agree wholeheartedly. I think we had made a move to bolster our park system by putting in a parks manager. I had hoped that would lead to an actual parks department to the size of our city. Honestly, we are one of the largest around here, and the ones bigger than us have full-time parks and rec departments, and many of the smaller ones have full-time parks and rec departments as well. I think it would certainly serve our city, especially with the amount of acreage that we have. I think it's more than desirous, but I think it's necessary, honestly, with the amount of park space we have. So, no, I agree with you wholeheartedly. I think that it feels like a move in we're going backwards a little bit, and I'm curious as well. How did we get to that, and are we folding it back into Public Works completely, or does it stand still as a park system? I'll stop there.
Okay. We'll go to Richard, then we'll go to Don, then to Nancy. But I think the person who's made this decision, I think Brian certainly needs the opportunity to answer the questions as far as what I heard in Brian's discussion of this during the work session was a move to efficiency. That was kind of the big thing that I heard and I took out of it. But again, I would be remiss if I didn't say I was a little frustrated that this type of conversation then didn't come up at the actual work session where we talk about this kind of stuff rather than waiting till we get to another meeting and now having all this discussion. I certainly appreciate your comments, but that's what our work sessions are for, is to have this kind of discussion, and nobody said anything at the work session. So first I'll go to Brian, let Brian address the reasoning and why this recommendation is being made from a staff level, and then certainly be happy to get council's comments.
So, I guess I'll just read the email that I had sent to all members of council on the 18th of November to explain why this recommendation is being made. So, quoting from that email, Parks Technician. Formerly titled Parks Manager, this position's title change and reallocation on the TO are reflective of the following considerations. Over the last several years, the city has invested millions of dollars in park infrastructure. Operational efforts need to expand beyond activation of new or updated recreational spaces to include general asset oversight and management. This position is reflective of more time spent in the field addressing asset maintenance and management issues to protect the city's recent investments. Operational efficiency is also a key reason for the relocation of this position in the TO. The Parks Division has no maintenance equipment or staffing of its own, relying on support from the Public Works Division. In the past, this condition has created situations where the work needs of the parks conflict with the work of Public Works. Locating this position under the Public Works Division should substantially reduce these work conflicts and increase operational efficiency. The YMCA is planning to increase their programming outreach in 2023 to a number of our facilities, including the Senior Center, Community Center, and the Eichelberger. With the development of these activities and through the utilization of other technical advancements of the YMCA, functions of the Parks Manager position, such as programming and facility reservations, are not internally necessary moving forward.
Okay, Richard?
Thank you, Mayor. In light of discussion, Vince, I certainly appreciate your comments. And Mayor, to your point, there was no conversation at the work session. That was an opportunity for me to review and further sleep on this matter. I have a secondary issue, not just with the parks, but also with our tax division as well. I've made it very clear that our tax division needs help. I have spoken directly to current and previous employees of the tax division. They need help. Mayor, tonight my request to further this conversation is to push us off to the next work session for additional conversation and discussion on the merits that have been presented. Thank you.
Any other comments? Ed?
Thank you, Mayor. I too had time to think and digest about this. Brian, I do appreciate you reminding us about the email you sent out in November or earlier, and I do appreciate that. I do find it a little bit hard to understand how moving the director of our parks underneath the Public Works director seems like that. Well, I mean, it doesn't seem, it is moving another layer of decision-making over the parks, and for efficiency, it would be much more efficient to have it completely separate, decisions made, and then, of course, the city manager yourself would have to decide if that is going to go happen, and then if it does, then it gets put on the schedule for Public Works, and our Public Works director works that in with his schedule. So now it's, the org chart shows if our Public Works technician, our Parks technician, did I get the name right? Technician now? Yes. Our Parks technician requests something, then Public Works director can say no, and then it's dead there. So I don't see how that's more efficient. That seems less efficient to me. Well, I mean, it doesn't seem like it is less efficient, but I understand that's your recommendation, and I do appreciate that with the extra time I've had to think about it. On a separate subject, I noticed the org chart doesn't have numbers on each individual position, but down at the bottom, the org chart has the total number of positions broken down. In the fire division, there's 63 full-time positions. How many of those are firefighter, paramedic, non-supervisory positions? Would you know?
I would not, sir, but that's why we had asked the fire chief to be in attendance at the work session, so that in the event you asked that question, we would have the appropriate person here to answer that question, but you did not elect to answer or ask that question at that time. So
Right.
I'm unfortunately without an ability to answer that specifically.
Okay. One thing,
It is in the legislation itself, above the TO, where it lists by position the numbers associated with each position.
okay, I need to take a look at that.
Legislatively speaking, I believe we adopted legislation to hire an additional 3 firefighters, which would bring the number from 39 to 42. We've discussed this at least 37 times that I can think of.
Yes, I would say
42 firefighters,
yes,
42 firefighter paramedics.
yes.
39 that we currently have, plus 3, as it always has,
Yep.
equals 42.
There it is.
On page 1 of the resolution.
Yep, right there. Okay, I just want to make sure. And Mayor, I understand, sounds like you're a little frustrated with that statement, and I understand that, but also understand, I'm not concerned with what people think or feel on this issue.
I'm not either. I'm concerned with the math.
My past experience has shown I like to dot my I's and cross my T's, because something changes in one org chart, then it's done. So, but anyway, I thank you
That's
very
what-
much for your
yes.
comments, Mayor.
That's what the legislation has been that we approved 3 or 4 months ago. 39 plus 3 equals 42.
Thank
Don?
you.
Thank you, Mayor. Vince, I'd like to address what you asked us here, because we did go into this in some detail and talked about it. And at the simplest explanation, what we had was we have a parks manager who simply had to go back to the public works manager to get anything he needed done. He has no staff. There's nothing dedicated to the parks manager. So the system that we had created was we had a parks manager who literally had to go back to his boss every time, I can't say his boss, to his peer, to the public works director and say, I need these guys to do this. I need these guys to do that. That's just my understanding. I don't see it as a step backwards. I see it as a more efficient utilization, because public works and parks are the people who take care of the parks are in public works. Public works, to me, we are eliminating this loop around that our parks manager had to go through to get things done. I thought Brian explained it clearly when he made the statement that at this point, because the parks, what do we call this guy again? Yeah, director, whatever, he would be reporting to the public works manager, and therefore their communication would be more in line with getting the job done. So I don't have a problem with it. I think it's a matter of aligning things so that they work, where before we had our parks manager out there with zero support. I, like you, when the parks manager came up, I was a huge champion for that. But the problem is, one guy out there doing it all by himself without a support staff underneath him makes no sense at all. I support the realignment as it is. Thank you.
Anything else?
Yeah,
Yes, Nancy?
yeah. First of all, I want to thank Brian for rereading the email he sent out, because I interpreted it exactly as you stated, that it was for efficiency, and so I had no problem with it. And the other thing, based on the conversations that are here, it is really up to department heads to dictate what their manpower requirements are, not council. We can have our own opinions, but we don't know what's really going on in there. And to talk to an individual person within a department is just not the way that you decide what manpower requirements are. That comes from the leadership. I think what would clear this up more than anything would help Vince and council and anyone else that's listening is that if Brian, if you could reaffirm the staff's commitment to the direction that the parks have been going in up to this point and where you plan for it to go in the future, regardless of how you have realigned the staff.
Sure. The ultimate goal is not to go backwards, but to go forwards. And as I mentioned, we've invested millions of dollars in our park assets, and we want to make sure that we're protecting those assets. And in order to do that, we need to make sure that all of the resources that we have, both in manpower and both in equipment, are being aligned accordingly. So the idea here is that the parks technician will pivot more towards the operational component and less towards the programming component, because we have other resources who can support the programming component that the community is asking for, and that somebody with the park managers or the park technicians' skills and his knowledge based on the training that he's been afforded will have an opportunity to be in the field more often and utilize those skills and that information and those certifications to make sure that the equipment and that the assets that the community has invested in are maintained and taken care of to the benefit of the community. This is an organization, to your point earlier, sir, that we don't have the resources of other communities. And so we don't have the ability to dictate and to dedicate and to focus employees the way that other communities do. And so we have to take the resources that we have and look at new ways to try and accomplish what it is we want to do. I don't want this to be a failure. I don't want this to not be successful. I am recommending this based on my 25 years of experience and an assessment of the resources that we have available and the needs and the wants of this community. If it doesn't work, we'll try something else. But this isn't intended to step back in any way, shape, or form. This is intended to pivot to the assets that we have available to us in resources and in personnel and advance what it is this community wants. And that's all that it is. So that is why I've recommended what I've recommended. That is why I think this is the best step forward.
Okay, what you just saw was a member of the community and also a volunteer on the Parks and Rec board come up and explain to them that their idea is stupid. Essentially, your idea is stupid. Eliminating the parks manager, someone who's, have you noticed since 2019 that parks are getting better? Have you noticed that? Should the parks manager, the one who manages the parks, get any of that credit? Why demote him? It makes no sense. Also, I want to point out something. Robert's Rules of Order. That's how these meetings are ran, by Robert's Rules of Order. And in that Robert's Rules of Order, there is a portion, you get the motion, and then you have discussion. Further discussion. Especially when someone new from the community comes up to speak. This is how you know they don't care what you say or what you do as a citizen. And you hear that by the mayor saying, I certainly appreciate your comments, but what I said earlier, about all this needs to be done at the work session. Just because we are forced to have a discussion piece here during the council meeting, the official meeting itself, well, that don't mean nothing. I don't want that discussion here. Well, he's not the dictator in Huber Heights. Folks, you need to wake up to that.
Again, I would be remiss if I didn't say I was a little frustrated that this type of conversation then didn't come up at the actual work session where we talk about this kind of stuff rather than waiting till we get to another meeting and now having all this discussion. I certainly appreciate your comments, but that's what our work sessions are for, is to have this kind of discussion, and nobody said anything at the work session.
And there it was. They don't care what you say. A citizen comes up, listens to the work session, because there's no time to speak at the work session, generally speaking. Citizen comes up at the council meeting, utilizing their 5 minutes, has an important point, and it's just pushed aside because, no, only us. We're making this decision. The people aren't. We're making it. We represent them. That's where it's at, folks. They represent you, yet that's how they treat you. The discussion at the work session, it's broad. There's a lot of folks there to answer questions. That's great. But in between that, there's another discussion right before the vote because you want to make sure that vote is cast correctly the way the people want it to be cast. Not the way you want it to be cast. But listen to how they talk, folks. It's not about you. It's about them.
And since I have the floor, Mr. Mayor, if you might indulge me for just one moment, I would remind council that this legislation and the legislation prior are not just about positions, but are also about people. And it is important that we are very conscientious about what we say with respect to positions and people in the public forum. So I would ask, because that's all I can do, that I would ask that those of you with concerns utilize the ability to communicate with my office in advance of the public forum so that I can address all of your questions and concerns as thoroughly as I can in the most appropriate venue before we're back in this room, where we have to be thoughtful about our comments and we have to be thoughtful about our statements on not just our positions within the table of organization, but our employees. I would remind you of that. And with respect to those comments, I would ask that you adopt this particular piece of legislation in consideration for all of those employees who are in those positions.
Brian, I would just like to back up and say I appreciate your comments, and I will say the same thing. We've addressed this issue before about council members coming to council meetings not prepared at the work session to address the items that have been on the agenda. We have situations where we come to work session.
So that appeared to be the interim city manager giving some on council the what for. Interesting. You, the people, elected your city council, and they hire the city manager. Have to be careful what you say in public. I thought government was for the people, by the people, and of the people. People, not politics. Remember that slogan? Your government has to be about the people or they're going to run over you. Additionally, I'm going to add the parks manager. Why wasn't he there to discuss any of this? What is his thoughts going forward? Does he want to be demoted?
I'd just like to respond to that, Mayor, by saying that sometimes, the work session is where that information is presented to us and we gather that information. I don't always like to make snap decisions like that. I like to chew on things a little bit, which is why we don't make the decisions on the night we receive the information. We make the decisions at a later date. Now, we've adjusted over the years our time frames and our process on how we do these things. We used to do 2 readings on a resolution. We used to do multiple readings on ordinances, and we've changed all that around. So now we're looking to pass every resolution on a first reading after a work session. But the work session is where, in my opinion, we receive that information for us to do our due diligence and do our research on it and to chew on it and think about what it is we're voting on before we come back to vote on it. So that's just my response to your concern of people being unprepared, because I'm not going to say that I'm unprepared at all. What I'm going to say is that oftentimes it's that week between that allows me the time to digest that material and have questions and concerns.
Yes.
Thank you.
And Councilman Otto said that perfectly. Sometimes you need more time to prepare. You're not unprepared coming to a meeting when there's more discussion before the vote. That's not unprepared. Wow, way to twist words. Anywho, how did it resolve at the end? Here's that.
The parks manager position. So I would tell you, let me rephrase that, I would recommend, based on where we find ourselves, since we didn't have time to prepare for these considerations, that you adopt this legislation so that the 222 employees who are not the focus of this particular concern can be ensured that their wage increases are available to them at the appropriate time and context, and that the one position that is impacting, if, however this is resolved to council's satisfaction, it is one position that has to be the focus of the additional efforts of finance as opposed to 223. That would be my recommendation.
Okay, so Richard, would you like to withdraw your motion and proceed as...
Mayor, I would like to withdraw my motion based on the conversation, and if the law director and the city manager are on the same page on this, and the city manager believes that finance department can work on that appropriately, so be it. I'll withdraw my motion to amend.
Okay, Ms. Kate, you withdraw for a second. Ms. Kate, you withdraw for a second.
I withdraw my second, Mayor.
Okay. Don, what does that do to your concerns or questions?
It did, thank you.
Okay. So looking for a motion and a second to proceed as presented. Okay,
Move to proceed as presented.
second. Anita?
Second.
A motion and a second. God help us, any further discussion? Tony?
Mr. Otto?
Yes.
Mr. Lyons?
Yes.
Mrs. Kitchen?
Yes.
Mr. Webb?
Yes.
Mr. Shaw?
Yes.
Ms. Baker?
Yes.
Mr. Campbell? Is not here. Mrs. Burge?
Yes.
Motion carries.
All right. So that's just about it. But I would be remiss if I didn't show you the original vote to demote the parks manager down to a park technician. That's essentially what we're talking about here. You can make your own mind up. But here's that vote, and I want you to pay particular attention on who votes yes to demote and who votes no, or to adjust the organizational chart. But we all know what it
We'll
is.
take a vote, and we'll see where it goes. Okay, Tony, call the roll, please.
Mrs. Burge?
Yes.
Mr. Otto?
No.
Mr. Lyons?
No.
Mrs. Kitchen?
No.
Mr. Webb?
Yes.
Mr. Shaw?
Yes.
Ms. Baker?
Yes.
Fails 4-3.
And I'll talk to you later. Thanks for being a member of Brick City Town Hall. There may be more videos like this coming out soon.